This is a pilot episode originally titled Trades Podcast That Doesn't Have a Name Yet. We're happy to republish it under its branded name, Off the Clock Toolbox Talk, Episode 1. If you find you're unsettled today by listening, reach out to a trusted friend or go to tradespodcast.com.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the podcast that doesn't really have a name yet. We're talking about men in trades and the toxic drug poisoning crisis, and we would love your help to come up with a name. You can go to tradespodcast.com and leave some feedback. Now, jumping right into a conversation. Karen, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about what is this thing? This is our first episode of the Trades Podcast that doesn't have a name yet. And I'm Karen, and I am the creator of this project. And
my name is Daniel Snyder. I'm a coordinator for Overdose Response Project in beautiful British Columbia, Canada.
Nice.
Well, I want to say something that stood out to me a little bit, just so you know something about my personality and kind of perspective as well. So kind of in the outline, you're talking about how I would say something along the lines, well, this sounds like a really sad podcast. I wouldn't. And then you're like, I wouldn't want to listen to depressing shit either. So we'll keep the talk about drugs to a minimum. Okay. I don't think drugs are sad at all. I actually think this is part of the error of our culture and society is that we blame drugs for everything, and we're totally missing the point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not really about the drugs precisely.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
I 100% know what you mean.
And part of my interest, my heart is to change the narrative a little bit, to get the focus off the drugs so we're actually more dialed in to the individuals, the real person 100%. Who's suffering, the real person who's struggling. And so often in my recovery journey, my years in addiction, primarily people around me were just obsessed with drugs. Like, you got to stop, the drugs are the problem. You got to quit using drugs. You got to be sober, and completely oblivious to the suffering and the pain that I was in, thinking that it was all caused by drugs.
Yeah.
So in one of my bios, actually, I think I'll change my Twitter bio too. I talk about drugs a lot because I think that we really got to take a more neutral approach to our conversation about drugs. Neither good nor bad. Yeah. Right. It's context specific.
Absolutely.
Drugs save lives every day.
100%.
And it does appear also that drugs destroy lives every day. So let's take the conversation further.
Yeah, 100% agree. And the only reason I put that in there is that that's kind of the starting point for a lot of people, or a lot of people think it's about drugs. And I 1000% agree. If anything, I would actually say it's about pain. I mean, pain is awful, and we don't want anybody to be suffering. When we understand kind of what pain is, in your brain, there is little difference between physical pain and emotional pain. So if let's say you got, friend of mine accidentally stabbed her husband in the leg with a barbecue knife. And so he had to go to the emergency to get stitches. If, let's say, the day he went to the hospital to get stitches in his leg, let's say they were giving out free brain scans and he got a brain scan, there'd be a certain part of his brain that would be lit up, showing that he is in pain because he got stabbed in the leg by a barbecue knife from his wife.
Are we sure that was an accident?
The hospital asked that. They questioned her for a while. Okay, so then let's say it's not for the physical pain. Let's say it's just that his heart is broken and he goes in to get a brain scan. Exactly the same part of his brain will be lit up on the brain scan, because your brain doesn't know the difference between physical pain and emotional pain. Pain is pain to your brain.
You know, I had a lot of people tell me, well, maybe not a lot, but I had a few close people tell me that pain was clearly driving my behavior. But it didn't resonate with me. I didn't understand what they meant, because obviously they were talking about emotional pain, but I really had fairly positive childhood experiences and a good family life when I was young. So I was doing a lot of comparing myself to other people and other people's experience, other people's pain. And I knew a lot of people who were suffering far greater than I was. So I minimized my own pain experience a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I, for that reason, I struggled to understand why I was struggling with addiction, what was underneath it, what the root causes were, and did often reduce it to just, well, you got to stop the drugs. That's the problem. So constantly I was sober, like getting sober, going to treatment or going to detox or doing something, and having lengthy periods of time of sobriety, 3 months, 6 months, even multiple years at times, but not sustainable because there was no insight, deep insight into actually what was driving addictive behaviors, what was driving those compulsions. Um, and just thinking, oh, it's just the drugs. You stop using drugs, your life gets better. Sure, it does actually get better in many ways. And I think I was a treatment superstar in a lot of treatment centers. They give me the oh, you're the poster boy of recovery kind of stamp of approval.
Mm.
Did amazing for while there in
Mm-hmm.
the safety bubble of treatment, but not sustainable, and primarily because of a lack of understanding of what that pain
Yeah.
exactly was that was underneath everything.
Gabor Mate says this, it's not why the addiction, but why the pain.
Mm. Yeah, that's the serious question. I don't think we ask that properly of people.
No.
I mean, it's not an easy journey to find out.
No, it isn't. And this is the fascinating thing. I'm definitely relating to that feeling of not knowing why you're in pain or why I'm in pain. For years, I brought 12-step panels in to talk to youth, as I've been a youth worker for my entire career. And so I've heard hundreds of people's stories, and almost everybody's story starts out with, I had a pretty typical upbringing, and because we all think that our upbringing is typical, because why wouldn't you? And I think once again, Gabor Mate has a book or something coming out called The Myth of Normal. There is no normal, and pain ultimately is how we learn as human beings. And so it is involved in our lives, and to think that we wouldn't have any pain, that's probably not normal.
Mm.
But yet that's normalized for us, right?
Yeah, so maybe we haven't been taught to identify the pain,
Mm-hmm.
understand it, and then really how to resolve it. And I mean, at the risk of always being reductive, and I think that that's something that we accidentally do in these conversations a lot, is take our own personal experiences, extrapolate them out on the rest of the world, and be like, well, I figured this out this way, so everyone else should be able to figure it out this way too, right? And
Yeah.
we're just far too unique. And this concept of the myth of normal really resonates with me because I spent a lot of time also in 12-step rooms when I was younger. And there was almost a cultural belief that we aren't normal, that there was something abnormal about us in these rooms, that we're unique. We're the ones with the addictive personalities, or we're the ones that are really different than all the normal people out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that belief system was really destructive for me.
Mm-hmm.
It did not help. It made me think that there was something wrong with me. But we're all humans that
Yes.
struggle with things, and our behavior can be compulsive at times, or addictive at times, or dysfunctional in other ways. And I don't, yeah, there's differences, but is the person who struggles with heroin and has a compulsion or substance use disorder with that drug really all that different than the person who is masking their pain in some other behavioral way?
As in workaholism or adrenaline junkie or any of the approved
Precisely.
addictions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Exactly.
100%. And it's all, we are just trying to bring comfort to ourselves. That's ultimately what it is. And why would you fault any creature for
Hmm.
trying to find comfort?
Not at all. And is that inherently wrong? uh
Exactly.
I mean, those behaviors aren't necessarily right or wrong. Again,
Mm-hmm.
we're back to the context. What's the motivation
Yeah.
underneath it? What's driving that? I was just chatting with my daughter the other day about the way we pair our behaviors. Emotional pain can be resolved physical pain can be resolved with opioids very,
Mm-hmm.
very effectively. But then, talking about brain scans and emotional and physical pain, that opioid is also resolving that emotional pain, maybe temporarily or not in the best way, but pretty effectively, at least for short term. And
Absolutely.
if you're pairing negative emotion with an opioid repeatedly, that makes a lot of sense for the way we maybe don't understand that
Yeah.
we've created a pattern in our lives.
In fact, I've heard research talks about how when soldiers were in Vietnam, they were using heroin because it was readily available. It's right there. And it soothed the emotional pain that they were in. And when they came back to America, the soldiers that had healthy relationships, connections, attachments back here in America had almost no withdrawal, almost like no addiction, and just returned to their families. And they had meaning and they had connection. They were connected to themselves, connected to their families, connected to their communities around them. The soldiers that struggled with addiction and had a negative effect from it were people who had poor connection back here in, we're in Canada, but these studies were done in America. And they're the ones who were potentially disconnected from themselves, not so much because of the war, although the war probably exacerbated it, but more so because when they left America in the first place, their connections were weak with family. Like they didn't have the healthy attachment, which was no fault of theirs. It was the environment that they grew up in. They didn't have the things that they needed. The study is connected to something called Rat Park, which was an experiment that was done by a British Columbia professor who noticed that our whole concepts of addiction are based on rats who will keep using heroin infused water again and again and again until they overdose and die. And so he said, maybe it's not the heroin, maybe it's the environment that the rat is raised in. So he did an experiment where he created something called Rat Park, where he created a rat paradise with lots of interesting things for the rats to do, other rats for socialization. The rats could have as much sex as they wanted. They could play with like different, like if you think of an amusement park, like there was lots of stimulation of all kinds of types. And they had regular water and they had heroin laced water. And the rats did not, even if they tried the heroin laced water, they wouldn't continually return to it because all they needed was the regular water. And in fact, it may have taken away from the enjoyment of their perfect environment, essentially, if they were numbing themselves out with the heroin. So it's not so much about why the drugs, it's about the environments that we've created. So yeah.
100% agree. Oh, that's the work of Bruce Alexander.
Yes, that's his name.
Right.
Thank you.
And such wonderful stuff. Johan Hari, the journalist, jumped off of that with his quote, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's connection.
Yes.
And I just
I
see
want I
that.
want to reiterate that statement again because it's so incredible. So the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection.
Right. And I know in my own life, when I was deep in addiction, I was very disconnected. I was disconnected from myself. That was actually the intent, really, in some ways, was to be disconnected. I didn't want to feel the emotional pain and the weight that was just constantly bearing down on me from kind of the hole I dug myself into, because it really does get progressively worse and worse when you're in that trap. But I was disconnected from self, but I was more importantly, I was just completely disconnected from people around me, disconnected spiritually, disconnected in every possible way. And I think this is where loved ones, a very select few, chose, despite everything, that they were going to make an effort to connect and not allow further disconnection. And I think that was a really a difference maker in my life. That was where people were getting advice, cut them off. People were getting advice, kick them out. They were getting told to have nothing to do with me. And some people followed that advice, but a handful said, no, we're going to stay connected to him. We're going to tell him he has value. We're going to tell him we see his potential. We're going to meet him where he's at. And those were the difference makers.
Mm.
And it's, those were the ones who showed me the value of connection and the value of myself. And it was just incremental change over a rather long period of time.
Yeah.
And that was not easy for people to accept. I think people want 30 days of treatment and then you're a new person.
Yes.
And
The magic pill. Once again, back to the idea of pills, right? It's like everything's supposed to be a magical fix, a wave of a wand, and that's not how we function as human beings. We have to explore the journey. You got to go on the hero's journey, is sometimes what it's called.
right, we're all on this journey.
Yeah.
It's not unique to a person with addiction.
Yeah.
Any one of us can think of our lives and maybe an issue or a struggle or a compulsion that we've had. And when we identify it as a problem, or when we realize there's consequence, this thing's not making my life better, we don't necessarily, it's not easy to just fix it tomorrow. Right?
No.
There's a lot of up and down and back and forth, and well, I guess relapse, if we want to call it that. And for many years in my addiction, like that's how I defined my life. It really felt as though it was defined by relapse, and a lot of times it was attached to belief systems that this is the way it is. Once an addict, always an addict. And relapse is just the way of life. And once you relapse, you have to start at zero. And, you know, you didn't, you know, you're a failure. And back to day one. And this kind of belief and mentality. And you have nothing to contribute because you just relapsed. So you need to stay silent. And that was just soul crushing and lacked hope. And my desire is that we present a conversation of hope, that we in our discussions about substance use and addiction, that the people listening always hang on to hope. This is if the conversation is hopeless, if there's no vision for the future, if there's no way to grab onto some meaning and purpose and something in life that's going to satisfy, then what do we have? So we have to offer hope here for sure.
Which I would also want to throw in there. If you are a person who's in a similar part of your recovery journey, perhaps using some of those psychological concepts, as I even hesitate to say it, but like clean time and relapse, and now, you know, you're back to day one, you're back to square one. If that's where you are and you're comfortable with that right now, if it's working for you, stay on that journey, keep exploring that journey. That's not the end of the journey, though, I think is what Daniel's saying. And so
it's an exploration for sure. I like that word because I mean, I wish I'd figured some things out sooner or maybe in a different order, but as long as you're approaching it from, I want to figure this out, I'm learning what works for me, what resonates for me. Oh, that belief system, I'm always going to be an addict, that's problematic for me. If I subscribe to that, then I'm always going to see myself in a negative way. That was where I landed. And so I ended up ultimately having to just say, no, it seems to me, actually, based on evidence and research, that people recover from addiction all the time. In fact, the vast majority of people do. And even the research suggests they recover without even going to treatment or 12-step meetings or counseling or therapy. They recover because at some point in life, maybe the best way to describe it is they mature out. They realize the consequences are more a problem than the benefit. And so they make a change and
they transform.
And this is how we're going to go about this step by step. This is why my ultimate thing is celebrate incremental change. You know, is the goal abstinence tomorrow? Well, it might be, but that might not truly be achievable. It might not be as easy as we hope. And so there can be incremental steps forward, and those should be celebrated, and not holding up sobriety as the only goal. Maybe it's a goal we do hold up and it's something that we aim at, but there's other things to celebrate along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite spiritual writers, Richard Rohr, he's actually quoting another mystic. It's not his original thought, but he's the one that I always quote it from. He says, when we don't allow our pain to transform us, we transmit it instead.
Oh, wow, that's interesting and deep.
Isn't that interesting?
Is that
And
kind of like hurt people, kind of in a
yes,
sense?
yeah, very much
Yeah,
so. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
that. And when we're transmitting our pain, we're sometimes transmitting it back on ourselves. Usually we're transmitting it to the people that are closest to us that we love. And that's the nature of, what we've historically called addiction and addictive patterns is transmitting that pain. But when we're able to get to the point in our journey where we're able to start looking at what does our pain want to teach us, how can we transform here, what are we moving on to, and you can't force it. You can't say, I have a month to do this, I better hurry up. It doesn't happen that way. It does its own thing, and it's fucking hard, man. Like, I mean, if you talk to any of my loved ones around me, they'd be like, massive transformation happening here, right?
Mm,
But when you're in the middle of it, it's messy.
yeah.
It's so freaking messy. Like, yeah.
It's kind of like, hey, we're just letting you know you still got some problems in your life.
Yeah. You still got some growing to do. You
There's
still got some
growing to do.
transformation to do.
Wonderful.
So we're supposed to be talking about, we like
Yeah, here
jumped
we are.
way in immediately. Let's just ask the question, what do we want to talk about in this podcast?
Yeah, that's the question. Well, I mean, we just crossed the 7-year anniversary of toxic drug poisoning emergency in British Columbia.
I can't believe it's 7 years. I thought it was going to be like a 2-year thing and then it would be over. 7 years.
This is a real problem because 7 years in doesn't feel like an emergency anymore. I think maybe the general public is almost starting to just accept this as status quo. Yeah. Here in our province, I mean, 6 people die every day.
Every day.
It's hard to, like, there's no progress.
No, in fact, it's getting worse. They just released more information. I think it was last week or the week before last that said that it's actually getting worse. It's not getting better.
Yeah. And we're not here necessarily to solve the toxic drug poisoning crisis, although I would love to do that. And I mean, I think that based on where we're headed, though, there's no real end in sight. And so in the meantime, we want to provide a resource to encourage people to open up dialogue on this topic, to help people have insight into what is going on, what is the toxic drug poisoning crisis, what's underneath all this, what is happening with addiction. But I work in the trades. I've worked in the trades most of my life. I've struggled with heroin addiction for almost 15 years, from my late teens to my mid 30s, really. Substance use dominated my life, nearly took my life, experienced overdose and miraculously survived. And I'm truly grateful to be alive and be able to share my story, my experiences, my recovery journey, the good and the bad, the ups and the downs, and be able to offer some hope. I'd like to have some insight into why men in trades are so disproportionately represented in this crisis. What is really going on there? What does substance use in the trades look like? What is the culture for men in the trades? What have the experiences been like? And we know that this crisis touches people across all demographics in our country and across North America. I'm curious about exploring this idea of safety, Karen.
Okay.
I just tell you a story. When I was this is about 20 years ago, I was working on a job site. Deep in my addiction, I used drugs at work daily. I'd smoke heroin in the washroom 3-4 times a day. Was kind of necessary in order to keep functioning. No one knew. I was really driven by this need to hide, because of the fear of being exposed, the fear of losing my job. But more importantly, at the core of my heart was the fear of being discredited or not liked. not
Mhm.
accepted.
Discredited. That's a
Yeah,
good word.
and so I hid my addiction as best I can. Most people really around me did not know. It was really actually the days that I did not have drugs, didn't have funds, or didn't have access, couldn't connect with a dealer. Then I'd be sweating and not performing to my best ability, and people, are you okay today? I'm like, oh no, today's the day I don't have drugs. No.
Yeah, yeah.
So I remember coming out of the washroom, after using one of those days and running into some coworkers who were in the midst of a conversation. They're just looking across the street at some person walking by, looking disheveled, making the judgment, making the assumption,
Yeah.
homeless, addicted. And I remember the words very clearly came out of their mouths about, look at that junkie.
Yeah.
And I think at the core of my being, I still showered every day and tried to take care of myself. I was functional. I had a job. I had a home. I had a vehicle. But I thought I was a junkie. At least
Mm.
there's a lot of weight in that word.
Yeah.
Uh, I knew that I had to hide from these people. They are not safe. Not that I was particularly inclined to open up my life to some coworkers on a job site,
Yeah.
but I think that how it landed on me was you cannot allow anyone to know about this
Yeah.
because you are less than.
Yeah.
Thinking about that, like those guys had problematic substance use in their life.
Yep.
Uh, it was the socially acceptable drug of alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
which they talked about and put on display their dysfunctional alcohol use on a regular basis. But somehow, like when it's other drugs or when it's attached to homelessness or when your functionality fades away, you lose your job as a result, you lose your housing, it destroys your relationships. Oh, suddenly you're less than,
Yeah.
you're other, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just only because of a number of really just circumstances outside of my control, so privileges really,
Mm-hmm.
that enabled me to continue to hide, to maintain my employment, to get access to treatment services, even all sorts of factors. I did not fall into homelessness, and it wasn't because I was better than,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So this issue of safety on the job site, like the culture that's there, how do we address that? How do we create safe environments where people, I mean, do we want people opening up to their coworkers and their supervisors about their substance use? Like, where do we go with this?
We're not wanting people to disclose to everybody. That's not what we're shooting for with this podcast. But yeah, just that piece of creating safety within oneself, but safety amongst us and the conversations that we're having. I mean, we really want to talk about stigma. We really want to talk about pain, physical pain and emotional pain. We really want to talk about the human things about us, our relationships. I always talk about relationships. The number one relationship is the relationship with yourself, because most of us have a really toxic relationship with ourselves. And then moving on to the relationships with our loved ones, with our closest ones around us.
Well, I have a way of thinking about that for loved ones, and it's kind of this concept of the shame narrative that I think most people who struggle with an addiction live in. They live in this narrative of shame. For me, it was, I'm a failure. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm just an addict, once an addict, always an addict. And all these kind of beliefs were bearing down on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on hyper alert for the world or the people around me to confirm this as truth. I'm
Mm-hmm.
always looking for, oh, see what that person said? They do think I'm a loser.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, see what that person said? They do think I'm a total failure. And so even the best of intentions, even
Yes.
people around me who wanted my success
Yeah.
would inadvertently, accidentally, through lack of understanding, be saying things with good motive
Yeah.
that triggered my shame and triggered my negative belief systems and kind of confirmed what all the things I thought about myself that were terrible
Yeah.
and actually really lies, not
Mm-hmm.
true. So my hope is that we kind of encourage the loved ones to learn about what it might mean to become a safe person for that. What does it take to not trigger that shame narrative? What does it take to go beyond the drug use or the misbehavior or the problematic behavior and see the person for who they really are, to see underneath and then get back to that pain that we
Yeah.
continually will
That would
talk
be a
about.
really interesting episode, which we would not call shame because nobody wants to listen to anything about shame, but just to explore that idea. Because once again, I've experienced relationships where I wasn't saying anything shameful to somebody who sounds like they were in a similar placement to what you were talking about, but they heard what from my words, the way that my words hit them, they just went straight to that place of shame. And
Mhm.
that's just the lens that they saw everything through. So I'm being fascinated by this conversation right now because I'm like deconstructing all the different parts and all the different moving parts. We're in a safe place where we can just kind of take this apart and just go, huh, there's another
Yeah.
factor going on there.
Just thinking about one thing in the trades that I've experienced is I've always worked with smaller companies that don't have human resources departments, that don't provide benefits, small number of employees, everyone kind of knows each other, not a lot of emphasis on safety, lots of WCB violations. I won't tell you what companies I used to work for. Those
There's
kinds of things.
probably tons of tradesmen out there laughing and nodding. They're like, yeah, I work for those companies.
Yeah. And this has been my experience. And then there's another whole kind of construction industry that's much more regulated, human resources department, big companies. When you have an issue, you have a person specifically that you know who to go talk to.
Mhm.
And so I think that there's a big difference in the way that you might disclose or even experience substance use problems between those two different worlds. So for me, just share another story. There was a time when I was spiraling. Things were getting progressively worse. I knew it was going to come to an end. And that's kind of how it went for me with opioid use. I would use for weeks or months, and it kind of was getting darker each day. And then I would kind of be draining my bank account, racking up the credit cards, and kind of with this awareness in the back of my mind that this is going to crash and burn soon. Always underneath it all was a motivation to get better. That was there. This is a problem. Life is not good. This addiction is not taking me where I want to go. And so I was in one of those places. I was spiraling, and I reached out to my employer at the time and said, listen, I think I'm going to need to do something soon. I got to go to treatment. Things are getting dark. And this person's response was supportive, but this is what they said. Oh yeah, that's great, but can you go in August, 3 months from now,
Mhm.
when we finish this job?
Mhm.
Because I was really relied upon, I was depended upon to get jobs done. I was a job lead hand on the site. If I left, because it's a small company, the project was going to crash and burn.
Yeah.
And so my departure to treatment would have actually affected the 3 or 4 other people's lives financially, messed up their lives because I was relied upon to get that job done. And this weight and this burden is upon a lot of people in the trades, that
Mhm.
there is a deadline
Yeah.
and there is money on the line, and there are other people's financial security on the line if I don't get my job done. And so this was pre toxic drug poisoning, pre fentanyl in the drug supply. So
Absolutely.
perhaps this person did not was not thinking in the context of like my life was at risk.
Mhm.
There wasn't 6 people dying every day at that time. I didn't see overdose almost ever.
Yeah.
from the late 90s to in my circle, it was very, very rare. You didn't really hear about people dying. And of course, in 2016, when we have this injection of fentanyl into the drug supply, and it really changed it very, very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
And we went from about 2 people that might have died on a daily, about 300 people that died annually.
Wow.
In British Columbia to where we were at last year, 2,250. So that's a dramatic jump, and that happened very, very rapidly. And so what does a person do when they're like, I have a problem and I need to go somewhere, but simultaneously there's pressure to work?
Yeah.
You got to work. You got to make money.
Absolutely.
You can't stop.
Yep.
You're paycheck to paycheck.
I have also seen that exact thought process or culture, I guess, of you work, you do the job, you keep working until a job is done. You've got these deadlines, you meet these deadlines no matter what. Break up families because the families had needs. It's like you're not allowed to have needs. You're not allowed to be a human being. So if you have any needs or your children have any needs, you risk getting canned.
Wow. Yes. How does a person like that advocate for themselves in a small company?
Mm-hmm.
There's not even recourse. Like, employers just let people go. Oh, you have a drug problem? Get out of here.
Yep.
You're done. And people, many don't know that there's recourse, or that the employer has an obligation or a responsibility, or that if you are struggling with a substance use disorder, you can't be fired for that. And
we need to have a whole episode on that with a lawyer.
Yeah.
So we understand the actual legalities of it.
I think that that's really important, is that people need to know what their rights are. They're just hanging on. I'm not sure that there's any easy way to navigate that in a systems way. This is messy human life. And so we need, we're talking about trades needing to inject some compassion and empathy into the way that they interact with their workforce, their employees. We don't have a history of doing this.
If you want to hear more about these episodes, once again, go to tradespodcast.com and let us know the ideas that you want to hear about, the things. If we haven't even touched on things and you're like, yeah, you guys have no idea, you need to talk about this, this, and this, send us the information. tradespodcast.com. This has been a Fraser House Society project, hosted by Daniel Snyder, co-hosted and produced by Karen Jansen, managed by Delan Young from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples. Production of this material has been made in part through a financial contribution of Health Canada. The views expressed herein do not necessarily reflect the views of Health Canada or Fraser House Society. The content of this podcast is conversation between people with living experience and should not be taken as professional advice. If you're a tradesperson who wants to help make things better, please contribute at tradespodcast.com.